All right, I'm going to talk about the Victorian Age briefly. Thank you guys for your flexibility this week. I now have a child doing distant learning at home, and so it's gotten even crazier in my house. If I'm talking too fast while you're taking notes, please just pause, right? That's the beauty of this, pause it. I have a 15-minute limit on this beautiful program I'm using, so if I talk too much, it'll have to split into two, but we'll see how it goes. So the Victorian Age in England covers the time period between 1837 and 1901. Basically, this is the time of the Pax Britannica, which goes from the end of the Napoleonic Wars to the beginning of World War I. This is a century of peace for Britain, and during this time, England becomes the leading nation of the world, the greatest empire of the world. During this time period, they had the best rulers than any other time in their history up to this point. Excuse me. Because England was the wealthiest country in Europe, it was known as the workshop of the world. If you remember, they led the way in the Industrial Revolution. And the British Empire was so large and had so many colonies that it could be said the sun never sets on the British Empire. At this point in time, a quarter of the known world was ruled by Britain, or at least controlled by them. So this is Queen Victoria. She led England from 1837 to 1901, thus the title, the Victorian Age. This is when England reached the height of its glory. Excuse me. She became a symbol of 19th century Britain. Because she saw the immoral rulers before her, she promised to her people that she would do good and be a great leader. She emphasized Christian character traits and helped maintain a strong moral foundation that upheld England's excellence. The Victorian ideals included duty, thrift, honesty, hard work, and respectability. She was the longest ruling monarch in English history up to this point. In 1840, she married Prince Albert of Saxony, which is in modern-day Germany, and they had a very happy relationship. They had 9 children and 38 grandchildren. Because they had so many kids, many of the future rulers of Europe, not just Britain, but of Europe, all are related to Queen Victoria in some sort of way. He very much encouraged Victoria to do the right thing during her rule and was her most influential political advisor. He was intelligent, fiercely devoted to his adopted country. Remember, he's not technically English. And so he put together the Great Exhibition in May of 1851, which was the world's first fair. It represented Britain's achievements in science, industry, and culture, and showed the world the awesome power of the British Empire, especially the strength of their industry. She's kind of like flexing, right? This is this is our country. Look how great we are. And so Victoria and Albert's great marriage and good leadership really restored respect for the English monarchy. Unfortunately, Albert died of typhoid fever in 1861. Victoria was heartbroken. She ended up living in seclusion and dressed in black for the rest of her life. So basically signifying that she is in mourning for the rest of her life. They also restored respect for the British crown because they lessened how much money they spent in court. They set an example for moral uprightness. Victoria very much worried that manners were becoming too loose and informal. And she was often said that young people are getting very American. I fear in their lives and ways. Basically, like, the Americans were too loosey-goosey, and she was worried about English propriety. Excuse me. So, under Victoria, the British middle class and many members of the working class felt great confidence in their future, and as the Victorian era went on, reformers continued the push towards greater democracy. So, in 1815, Britain was a monarchy with a parliament and 2 different political parties. Britain still doesn't technically have a written constitution. Since the late 1600s, Parliament held the real power. The monarch had the right to veto or reject an act of Parliament, but no king or queen had done so since 1701. So the House of Lords, those are who were either inherited their position, or if there was no one left to inherit that position, they would be appointed, or if they're creating a new position, they would be appointed. They dominated Parliament over the House of Commons, who were the elected people. The House of Lords had the right to veto bills that were passed by the House of Commons. And so there was a movement to make Parliament more representative. Excuse me. Political parties at the time were the Whigs, who were liberal, and the Tories, who were conservative. And there was very much limited democracy in the 1800s. By the 1800s, less than 5% of the total population could vote. Women not voting at all, right? There were very strict property requirements that kept many men from voting or holding most public offices. There were also religious restrictions, so Catholic Jews and other non-Anglicans could not be elected to the House of Commons. Representation in the House of Commons was unfair because it did not reflect the population increase in the cities. So there's the Reform Bill of 1832, which was a turning point in British politics. It redistributed seats in the House of Commons, giving representation to large towns. So in America, we do something like redistricting, right? We look at the census. Every time there's a census in the U.S., our representatives are assigned, right? And each state gets a certain number. And that's why it's crucial when you become adults or encourage your parents, you need to complete your census form. Because if we don't get counted properly, then we might get less representation than we should have. Right? So in here, they redistribute the seats so that the large towns have better representation. They also enlarged the amount of voters by granting suffrage to men with a certain amount of property. So now the property requirement's still there, but it's less property that they're required to have. And then we have the Chartist Movement of 1838. You guys watched a video on this already, so hopefully you did what you were supposed to do yesterday and you remember. If not, go back and watch the video and do the assignment from yesterday. It'll be considered late, but better than nothing, right? Excuse me. So the People's Charter demanded more rights. You guys already watched this. Basically, bottom line, people wanted more reforms. So the Reform Bill of 1867 gave the vote to working class men. So as long as you were working, you were able, excuse me, to vote. We also, see the Liberal Party with William Gladstone. Gladstone's own political doctrine emphasized equal opportunity and opposition to trade protectionism. It came to be known as Gladstonian liberalism. He was very popular among the working class. People called him the People's William. And in 1868, he became prime minister for the first time. He served prime minister for 12 years over 4 different terms from 1868 to 1894. Excuse me. So the Ballot Act, of 1872 basically made it so it was a secret ballot. So your boss couldn't find out what you voted for. Because a lot of companies would try to, like, if you don't vote for this person, we're going to fire you, kind of a thing. So now it's secret. the Reform Act of 1884, it basically extended the vote to agricultural workers. And then the Redistribution Act of 1885 equalized representation on the basis of 50,000 voters for each legislative constituency. So it ends up tripling the electorate and prepares the way for universal male suffrage. If you go and look up how many members of parliament England has or Britain has today and how many people live there, their representation is much higher than in America. And it's also very much more equal. Like here, because ours is based on states, not simply by population, you have some states with higher representation. So like Vermont, it's like they have one representative for every like 20 or 200,000 people, whereas in California it's like one per every like 900,000 people or whatever. So in Britain it's a little more equal. Their MPs also spend more time with their constituents, but they also have a smaller landmass, so it is what it is. Anyhow, that's my little rant. If you get me for US, you'll hear a rant. Women don't get the vote for quite some time. Or not quite some time. They get the vote later. Okay, we'll talk about them, I think, on Friday. All right, Christianity in Victorian England. This time period, most people have a high esteem for Bible and its principles. And England during the Victorian Age was known for its great preachers. For example, Spurgeon. And your assignment today will be to read or listen to a Charles Spurgeon sermon. And so he lived from 1834 to 1892, and he was pastor of London's largest church. He was known as the Prince of Preachers. He was the greatest preacher of modern times, by most people's opinion. I know perhaps as well as anyone what depression means and what it is to feel myself sinking lower and lower. Excuse me. Yeah, at the worst, when I reach the lowest depths, I have an inward peace which no pain or depression can at least disturb. Trusting in Jesus Christ, my Savior, there is still a blessed quietness in the deep caverns of my soul. Charles Spurgeon suffered deeply from depression. He also had physical ailments. Modern science believes that he had gout. You can look it up. It's pretty terrible. And so having a pastor who was vulnerable and willing to like talk about their problems was different and unusual. And he very much related to the people. There's a lot of names we could throw out. F.B. Meyer, Dwight Lyman Moody. It's also known as the Great Century of Missions. You have Hudson Taylor, who goes to China, David Livingstone, who goes to Africa. And his story is really interesting if you care to look it up. People thought they lost him in Africa, but he was like, no, I'm just chilling. Interesting guy. Amy Carmichael and her different orphanages in India. And then there's also a time of charity. So you have George Mueller, William Booth with the Salvation Army. You have the YMCA, Lord Ashley, Florence Nightingale. A lot of you, when you did your resume projects, did some of these people. And so when you go back in person, you guys can like look them up on the wall, or, you could Google them. But anyhow, I have 1 minute left. This was perfect. This is going to be the end of the lecture. So at this point, you're going to go, now that you've listened to this, you've taken your notes, you're going to go into Schoology and you're going to do your assignment on Spurgeon. You should have plenty of time to finish it in class. If for some reason you don't, then it will be homework. Also, please remember that you guys do have to complete the test by Friday, so please use some time to finish reading. Once you open your test, you have to complete it. It's a block period today. Use your time wisely. I looked over most of your forms that you submitted yesterday, and it made me really sad because I've given you a lot of class time to work. So there will not be, do your work.